call this work session to order. Assembly Continuing Education. Let's go ahead and start with introductions, starting with Austin.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Pete Peterson.
Crystal Kennedy. Meg Zalatow.
Forrest Dunbar.
Felix Rivera.
Gary Jones.
Kent Colblaze, Director of PME.
Craig Lyon, AMATS Coordinator.
Fred Dice.
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
John.
John Weddleton.
And then Suzanne LaFrance is also here. All right, so we have two different topics for today. I think we're going to start with the CIP, and then next we'll move on to the other letters of the alphabet. So, let's start with CIP.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members, for having us here. As I said, I'm Kent Colblaze. I'm the Director of PME, and with me I have Gary Jones. He's the Capital Improvement Program Manager, and also Chelsea Ward-Waller, who's the Public Information Officer for PME. So between the three of us, hopefully we can answer any questions you have. I think the genesis of this was probably some email conversations I had primarily with Assembly Member Quinn Davidson regarding maybe Campbellwood subdivision and just questions about the process for projects. And Chris Schutte suggested that maybe the best way to address that would be a very informal kind of a not a seminar, but just a discussion about how we do things, opportunity for you to ask questions, and if we can't answer the questions here, we'll be sure to follow up. So with that, I think I'll just jump right into it. As an overview, this is the capital improvement program. This is broken down with all the departments. PM&E is down towards the bottom there, and this the capital improvement program is a 6-year program for capital improvements across the municipality. And of course, we're interested in roads and drainage projects. This has all the other departments on it as well. And you have a copy of this that you're welcome to take with you. One thing I want to note on here is the asterisk at the bottom. Once you get into 2022, you see a number of $207 million for PM&E. 22 and beyond, we have rolled in the projects that are programmed to be funded by, or that would be envisioned to be funded with grant money. We know the status of state grants, and I'll talk about that later. I just wanted to highlight this number is right from the budget book, and wanted to point out why that's in there. Current year for 2020 is in the range of 38.6 with some amendments, which I think you're already aware of. There have been some recent questions about the calendar and the process for the CIP development, the budget development, and the program development. So I wasn't going to run through this. This is an overview of the budget process, and I think the part that probably is of most interest to folks is the engagement with community councils and internal agencies and how we arrive at a project list that we then bring to the administration, that the administration brings to you. So quickly today, plan on touching on capital projects in general, the conception of projects, a brief overview of how we evaluate projects and develop a CIP list, the various sources of project funding and some of the challenges around that. Road improvement districts, which some of you may be familiar with, that's a separate funding opportunity that has some challenges. And then a little bit of discussion about collector roads and local roads and historical funding for those and how things have changed in that arena as well. And I think I mentioned if you have questions, I'm glad to take them at the end. If you want to jump in, I'm glad to answer questions now. This map is the Anchorage Roads and Drainage Service Area. It's interesting. It includes Elmendorf. Of course, we don't work on J-Bear, but apparently the boundaries in code include J-Bear. But the reason I wanted to talk about this is that for what we normally think of as roads and drainage bonds, PM&E and the municipality can only do projects within Anchorage Roads and Service Drainage Area. So we can't do projects in Girdwood, Eagle River, Chugiak, the hillside, generally east of Abbott Road or Abbott Loop Road or Elmore. So quite often we get questions from constituents or from assembly members asking, can PM&E or can the bond program help with a project or a deficiency on the hillside? And generally, the answer to that is no. And that's because the bonds are for ARTSA, and it's embodied that way in code. So just wanted to touch on that. Capital projects in general for PM&E and traffic and street maintenance, all of our projects are under the same umbrella. They would include roads. And a road project could be a basic resurfacing. The road structure's in good shape with the asphalt pad. We just come in and resurface it. That might include ADA work at intersections. Quite often it does. That's a federal mandate, but it's generally just resurfacing the road. Reconstruction would be, we have a road that maybe generally meets code, but it's just falling apart. And we come in and it might be from the drainage system up. We tear the whole thing out, rebuild it. And then an upgrade the best recent example of an upgrade would be the Pleasant Valley project that's going on. Those streets were strip paved, 20 foot wide. The drainage was ditches, no storm drain system. That project, I guess west of Pussy River, is reconstructing or upgrading that whole street to meet current code standards. So that's the most comprehensive type of project. As well as road projects, we do standalone drainage projects. So quite often a drainage project will involve upgrading a road because quite often our drainage system is in a road, but we do standalone drainage projects as well. We also do pedestrian improvements. The one that you may be familiar with that's in design phase right now is the West 32nd, 33rd Avenue to establish an east-west pedestrian connection there. We have several others that have been done and are underway. We do some standalone lighting projects. The downtown signal and lighting project is the biggest one right now, but we have others. Traffic calming, we work very closely with the traffic department, and I think Assemblymember Peterson was asking about a picture on the construction update that was handed out, and that is a traffic circle in Russian Jack. And then we do other safety projects that might include striking projects, specific lighting areas, maybe some more traffic calming, and I think there's a school safety component to that as well. The CIP also includes, this says ongoing projects, but it should really maybe say ongoing programs. We have an annual recurring program for roads and storm drains. We work very closely with street maintenance on that, and they are able to take on smaller projects that may not rise to the level of a full-blown reconstruction project. We also have an annual program of ADA improvements. That's mostly curb ramps to come into compliance with the federal requirements for accessibility. We have a standalone flooding, glaciation, and drainage program to address problems as they pop up. Again, that's mainly street maintenance. The next one is Pavement Rehab. That is also typically street maintenance, although we contract out some of that, but street maintenance has a good crew and ability to do some of the smaller projects, prolong the life of the street while we're working to get it onto the broader CIP program. Some sound barrier and retaining wall replacement, and then we also have a program right now where we are assessing the condition of storm drains that we know are problematic. We generally do that with a closed-circuit television system and use that information to develop projects to reconstruct those areas that are deficient. So this is probably one of the things that we get the most questions about, and one of the things that maybe drove the idea of this work session, and that's how a project comes about. How does it get to PM&E's desk? How does it end up being evaluated and hopefully placed on the CIP list? These aren't in order of priority, but the way they come in would be the community council surveys. And some information went out to some members here recently, and there's information in the packet. That process will start March 1st, I believe. And there'll be a call letter that comes out from either OMB or the mayor's office to the councils. And then there's a 2 or 3 month window where there's a survey online that's available to the community councils, and they can submit projects. So that's one way that PM&E and Public Works Department get projects. Assembly members contact us directly. Constituents contact us directly. Constituents contact assembly members and bring concerns to us. We put those on the list, and generally what we do in response to a request like that is we have street maintenance and one of the design engineers in PM&E go out, drive the street, probably quite often with Gary, and take a look at it, gather some information that we can use when we're evaluating projects. We also include administration priorities, and the one I mentioned a while ago, 32nd, 33rd pedestrian upgrades, came out of the administration, so we evaluated that one. Acts of nature, you're familiar with the Northern Lights culvert failure that we're going to repair this summer, the Providence culvert failure from last year. We had some earthquake damage to Dowling Road and 3rd Avenue. Right now, we're pursuing funding through Fed Highways, but had that not been a possibility, those likely would have ended up on the bond package, or at least as a proposed package, a proposed project for the bonds. We get most of our projects, I would say, from street maintenance. They're the folks who are out there every day dealing with the citizen complaints about the condition of roads and flooding and things like that. Those complaints come to us, we hear about them, we support street maintenance, but they're the daily face of road maintenance in Anchorage. So we work very closely with them, with Paul Van Lanningen and his folks. They bring us projects as they come up. We consult with them during the evaluation period to bring in new projects that they're aware of. I think Gary told me that 60, 70, 80% of the projects perhaps arise from street maintenance and their input. Yeah, so I guess that's what the last bullet said. And then in those sub-bullets there, I did want to point out that I mentioned it earlier, street maintenance has a really good set of folks and a good capability to do some work to prolong the life of roads. So they've done some overlays on 36th Avenue east of the Seward Highway recently. Just to extend that, we have a CIP project in the works. Did you have a question?
Yeah, it's kind of.
Yeah, thank you. My question is, when you were talking about consulting, so kind of brought this up. You have the expertise within your department to deal with things that are probably outside of what some of the local road boards can do. So how do you coordinate, or how do you work kind of that effort in conjunction with projects that need to be done in Subursa or any of the other?
We have some standing contracts, term contracts we call them, with several engineering firms with expertise in drainage, road construction, lighting, some other areas, geotechnical investigations. So we're able to support the road boards there. If there's a specific project, we can't use bond funds for that, but if they come to us with separate funding, we can accommodate that request. I don't want to speak for street maintenance, but I don't believe street maintenance generally can expend their budget to work on a project that's outside of our state.
Okay.
I don't know, did that fully answer your question?
Yeah, like I said, I'm just, when you were talking about just the idea of consulting about solutions for certain problems, I don't know that, like Subursa that I'm familiar with, has that expertise in either. So I was trying to figure out if we technically, because we haven't really done any big projects like that, so would we technically hire out for that with an independent, or would we rely on the expertise of the bigger municipal department, and just if there's any collaboration in there?
I would say there is collaboration. I work very closely with Mark Littlefield, provide him advice when he asks.
Okay.
I think that as a standalone entity, I think Subursa would, if it were a large project, $1 million project or more, they would write a contract and advertise and hire an engineering firm to design the project. And we could assist with that if they needed assistance, but that's, I think, generally how it's been handled in the past.
Okay, thank you. Well, and I was just thinking of a specific situation with the water that we've had out in Meadow
Yes.
Creek, and trying to figure out, okay, where do we go from here with that? Just that initial conversation about, oh, this is what's going on. What do we do about it? Not necessarily how do we pay for it, but how do we get the brain power together to really try to figure out how to find a solution?
Yeah,
So.
and I would say that the engineering staff within PM&E, we have contracts. We also have in-house staff, and we're always available to provide, sit down with Mark Littlefield or others and provide any assistance or guidance or recommendations. And we do that
Great.
pretty regularly.
Perfect, thank you.
Yes.
This is another area that I think has been of interest with at least some members of the Assembly is how we evaluate a project. So once we have this list of projects that might come from street maintenance, it might come from community councils, it might just be something we've known about for a while. We have a process where we bring in representatives from PM&E, from traffic, from street maintenance, from planning, and from AMATs. And that group, and I think this effort's starting again soon, sit down with a set of criteria. And those are the criteria on the right of the screen or the right of your page. And they use all those, then they're weighted, and they evaluate every project, a very lengthy and involved process, and come up with a ranking. Now that sounds really clean, but as you can imagine, you're trying to rank a sidewalk project against a failed street, against a storm drain that perhaps is causing flooding. So it's never as simple as it might appear on paper, but those are the criteria that we use to evaluate projects.
Felix, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Thank you. Is there a quota for each type of project? Like, do you try to balance, we're going to do a certain amount of sidewalk because we want to do pedestrian or whatever, or we're going to do a certain amount of road? Like, and do you have this calculation of what goes on the bond and what people believe makes sense, or how do you take that into account?
I'm going to start through the chair. I'm going to start with an answer, and then I'm probably going to turn it over to Gary to bail me out. I don't believe we have a quota that says we're going to do so much new road construction and so much reconstruction, pavement resurfacing, and so much drainage work. We really try to mesh the projects based on the severity of the need. We do have to keep in mind that if we do all construction projects 1 year, if we spend $40 million doing construction projects for a couple of years, addressing critical needs, and if we don't have design projects in the pipeline, we're going to reach a point where we're kind of stopped from doing anything. And then you didn't ask this question directly, but there's also the geographic factor. How do we? And I've got a slide here where I do want to talk about that. So with respect to the type of work, Gary, I'll turn it over to you. Do we have criteria that break that out?
Our primary focus is the road system, the infrastructure there. And when we do a road, we are also addressing the pedestrian facilities, the street lights, the drainage. So all those other components get wrapped in. And sometimes we overlook that. It's like we have the ADA program, but on the other hand, we spend more on ADA upgrades doing our regular projects than we do with the ADA program, specifically. Does that answer what you were looking for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've had some discussions about walking routes to schools and safety. How does feedback, or does it from like the school district factor into any of the evaluations, or is there an avenue for it too?
The traffic department is handling that, and they work with principals of schools to get the data they need to make those determinations on what areas are going to get funded.
So it's another input like from community councils in a way, that sort of feedback?
Yes. As much as possible, get all the input that's out there to make the best decisions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I put this in mainly as a reminder, a talking point for me, but some things to remember, and you're as aware of it as I am, as we are. The existing needs far, far outweigh the available funding. I wouldn't even want to put a number on a dollar number on the needs on the municipal transportation and drainage system in Anchorage, but certainly 30 or 40 or $50 million a year bond package doesn't come close to addressing all the needs. So the existing needs exceed available funding. In our ranking process and evaluation, we will make exceptions for high priority critical needs safety projects. We've done that in the past. We always want to be as responsive as possible to public safety. I mentioned a little bit ago the need to balance the design and construction. Another important thing is to make sure that if we do a design, that we don't put it on the shelf for so long that it becomes stale, that code changes, that conditions change. So we don't have a set time frame, but I would say that if we have a design, we would like to move that towards construction in a no more than a 3 to 4 year time frame, or we're going to have a significant cost to go back and refresh that design. And then the last thing is, it's obvious, but new needs that are identified through any of these processes can take several years to come to bring them to construction because of the timeline needed to do the design work, but also the backlog of other priority projects that are above them on the CIP list.
Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regard to new needs and how long it might take to proceed to the point of construction, how does that work with new development? I mean, if somebody comes in and they've got an idea of developing this particular property, then what's happening there with coordinated efforts for that particular new property?
So through the chair, I would, in general, if a developer has envisioned the project, whether it's a new subdivision or a new office building on an existing lot, generally the developer is required, it's their responsibility to build improvements associated with a project like that. There are certainly, one of the, I guess, an example of a situation where the municipality is working with a developer is the Tudor Elmore complex, where we're working through the AMATS program to build a road that will not necessarily directly support the development, but is needed for the traffic flow that's envisioned by the private development that's coming. But in general, if it's a private project, the developer is responsible for that.
Okay, so we don't have a lot of particular places where a new development has kind of impacted the municipal system somewhere down the road. We're not worried about that so much.
Through the chair, I'm probably venturing a little out of my expertise. I think that an example of that is 100th Avenue. There was quite a bit of development at the Cavella store, the Target store. There was some planned development on the Siri parcel on the west side of C Street there. So the municipality developed the project to extend 100th from Minnesota to C Street in support of those developments and improving the east-west traffic flow into the neighborhoods over by Southport. So that's an example of where that happens. In my experience, it's not very common, and I guess I'd ask Gary if you have more to add to that.
It'll certainly impact the decisions we make. However, as a general rule, we are so far behind maintaining what we already have that it's very difficult to do anything new. And secondary to that, most of the major roads that you may think of when you think of major roads in Anchorage are actually owned by the state of Alaska, so we can't touch them.
Good point. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, one of the last things you said about new needs may take several years to proceed reminds me of the 42nd Avenue project. They're 35% design right now or whatever, but they had the water line breaks here a month or so ago. And so the people that live in the neighborhood got some flooding because of that. And so they want to get that project finished this summer. And I'm telling them at the community council meeting, we can't build it until it's completely designed. And then if we don't have the funding to build it, you still can't do it. So it's not possible for that to happen this summer. And sometimes they don't like to hear things like that. I mean, most of the time they don't like to hear things like that.
Ms. Alatel?
Thanks. Actually, Mr. Peterson's example, how does that compare to the Northern Lights fix that we have planned for this summer? Was that already kind of designed and planned and it just seemed to catastrophically fail in good timing? Or can you talk to me a little bit about the timing of those two projects and why one is significantly or different than the other?
Yes, through the chair. The Northern Lights culvert failure we view as an emergency with the potential for harm to the public. That there may be a picture in the slideshow here towards the end. That culvert has completely rotted away at the water line, and what brought it to our attention was street maintenance trying to fill a pothole, and they dumped load after gravel in it. And so we're concerned that if that failure continues, that road could catastrophically fail at some point. So what we have done is just this week we've awarded a contract to CRW Engineering. We advertised it on a very short timeline, had good response from the A&E community, and awarded a contract with a very accelerated design and construction schedule to hopefully have it done by mid to late July. So I think in my mind, in our mind, the difference between that and 42nd Avenue is that 42nd Avenue is clearly a need. And the water line breaks are definitely impact residents. But now that that's been repaired, we don't view that, I don't mean that to sound that way, but that is not an emergency situation that is going to affect life and safety. Whereas the Northern Lights Culvert, if a fire truck or a school bus was driving over that and it failed, somebody could be hurt.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So I think my next slide talks to what I was mentioning when I was responding to Assemblymember Quinn Davidson's question. And that's geographic distribution. We've had questions about this in the past, whether there's a formula for deciding where we do projects. And the general answer to that is no. We really weigh our projects based on the objective factors, the evaluation criteria, the potential harm to the public, the demand for the project. They're driven by need. But we know that there are high priority needs all across Anchorage, from Girdwood to Subursa, and from the hillside all the way up to West Northern Lights. Within ARTSA, we recognize that all the voters vote to support those bonds, so we want all the voters to see the benefits of those projects. So we, within the parameters of the critical need of a project and public safety and transportation, we do try to distribute projects so that all the voters who support our projects will see a benefit. But we don't have a criteria that says every assembly district gets a project, or this year we focus on East Anchorage and next year we focus on West Anchorage. That's not how we craft our projects and craft the CIP. Yes.
I'd like to add to that we do have some of the programs that Kent referred to earlier, the annual funding programs, and much of that money goes to street maintenance. And I know that street maintenance definitely makes an effort to spread out that funding throughout all the assembly districts. So the larger projects, no, we go with the greatest need, but when you have so many smaller projects, that does get spread out through the different assembly districts.
Thank you, Gary. So I may have had a slide a little bit out of order here because we talked about a lot of this, but one of the outcome of this solicitation of projects, our evaluation of projects, weighing all the factors, looking at how much money is available in any given year. The outcome of all that is the capital improvement program list, and that's the list that comes to the assembly probably late in the summer, early in the fall. That's a 6-year list of our highest priority projects. We update that annually. It of course is revised when new things come up, like the Northern Lights Culvert failure. And again, I mentioned before, we work very closely with many other municipal agencies on developing this list. We try not to do it in a vacuum. And then separate from that, PM&E, but really Gary, maintains what we call the capital needs list. So that's projects that we don't want to lose track of. They maybe didn't rise to the level of being on the CIP list for a given year or for the next few years, but they're needs that we want to keep track of for a variety of reasons. Occasionally there's separate funding sources that come available that we could take advantage of, but more broadly, we just don't want to lose track of something that could become a larger issue later. I guess an example of that would be we quite often respond to storm drain failures, similar to the Northern Lights project, but in local neighborhoods where we develop a sinkhole. We'll go in and cut out a 20-foot section of storm drain, repair it, repave the street, but we know that the rest of the storm drain's in poor shape. And in order to not lose sight of that, we keep it on this needs list. Project funding opportunities. There's really 3 funding sources, or there have been 3 funding sources for road projects on municipal roads in Anchorage. It's bond funding, state grants, and the AMATS program, which Craig Lyon will talk about a little bit later. The bond program is fiscally constrained for economic reasons and to gain the support of voters. We don't want to put out a bond package that voters won't support. The average bond package over the last 5 years is about $32 million. This year it's 39 with the amendment. I think that takes it to 43, so a little bigger than usual, or than the recent past. State grants. The last time we got a state grant was 2014. There was a caveat to that. We did get $484,000 last year for Jewel Lake lighting, but that was kind of a unique grant that didn't come through the normal channels. For the preceding 10 years, we got about $30 million. We got about $490 million total, ranging from $30 million a year up to $107 million one year. And that's gone to zero. So that, as you can imagine, has had a huge impact on our ability to respond to the needs across Anchorage. And then the AMATS program, I just wanted it on here so I didn't miss it, but Greg will talk about it more. The bond package, you've had some questions about how that amount is developed. PM&E gets guidance from the administration on the, I guess, the palatable amount for a bond package. We provide a list of projects. We work with the administration to refine that list and to come up with a final list and an amount that is acceptable. The factors that are used in determining, and I talked with the Chief of Staff Owner Browse to get some of this information, the factors that are used to determine the bond amount are the amount of debt that is being retired at any given year, the cost to borrow the money, the types of projects, and other funding opportunities such as state and federal funding. This,
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to say, one thing that they take into account a little bit when they decide what to put on the bond package is what part of town it's in. They want to get people to vote in favor of the road bonds, and so if there's no projects in their part of town, they might be more likely to vote against it. But if there's a project in their neighborhood or whatever, they're more likely to vote in favor of it.
yes.
So by putting a variety of projects out there in different parts of town, we help to ensure that the darn thing will pass.
Yes, through the chair, that's very correct. We are very cognizant and very appreciative of the support that we get from the voters in order to have bond money to do the projects that are high priority. So the administration does work to make sure that all voters are beneficiaries of those funds.
Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you remind me as to the total of the deferred maintenance? I know it was mentioned that maintenance, there's way more work that can be done. I mean, how much work would you say?
I don't know that we have a number, and we can work to find one. I would say it's well over $1 billion. You know, our CIP list right now, just the 6-year list, is in the $600 to $700 to $800 million range, and there's projects that are not on that list. Yeah.
I know there's a balance between deferred maintenance and the cost of emergency repairs being higher than ongoing maintenance. There's figuring out how to proceed with those limited resources, I guess, challenging.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Weddleton?
Pursue that a little more, because when we vote for a bond, if it's something new, it'll have an element, where we raise the taxes to accommodate pay off the bond, but also an element for maintenance and operation will be in there. So does that money ever does that go to you for maintenance and operation, or does that just kind of go in the general fund and it's used whatever?
Through the chair, I believe that money goes directly to street maintenance.
So street maintenance budget slowly rises. Is it realistic? Is it a realistic amount for them to maintain what we're creating?
We consult directly with street maintenance in order to come up with those numbers. For example, for this bond package, we consulted directly with Paul Van Landingham on, it might have been the 32nd, 33rd. I don't remember what project it was, but we identified the project to street maintenance, and they take the time to figure out what it's going to cost them to maintain so many feet of road, so many lane miles, sidewalks, whatever that may be, street lights. And so they provide us a operation and maintenance number that's based on their specific review of that project.
Okay, good, thank you. Next. Yes, Mr. Gates?
Yeah, on the bond package, when it's being developed, sometimes we remember for a minute at the last meeting for council, but that's not really the best time. Or can you comment on when is the best time or ideal time for some members to have input on projects that are being put together in the bond package?
Through the chair, so my caveat is that I've been in the job for a few months, so I'm learning the process. I may defer to Gary again on this one. I think that the process generally is that PM&E and the other agencies develop the priority list based on just the objective look at the facts and the priorities and the criteria. Then the administration takes that and crafts it into a list that reflects the size of the bond package they want to put forward and the geographic representation that Assemblyman Peterson referred to. And then after that, it comes to the Assembly, and I believe that's in the August-September timeframe. October. So that would be the official time, I guess, for the Assembly to have the opportunity to provide input on the bond package. Pardon? I didn't know. All planning and zoning also sees the package. So I guess that would be an opportunity as well. So the slide I have up here now is just the history of bonds for the past, I guess, 20 years. Been focusing on the roads and transit bonds over the past 20 years. The city has bonded for about $650 million, averaging probably in the $30 to $35 million a year range. Some very low years in the early 2010s, and back up in probably more normal historic range now. And keep in mind, this is only municipal bonds. I'll talk a little bit about state grants as well. I just put this in here for perspective. This, apologize for it being small and hard to read. I just copied it out of the OMB budget book. But this is the history of state grants to the municipalities since 1997 across all the departments, fire, police, health and human services, etc. PM&E was by far the largest recipient of those, about $500 million over the past 23, 24 years. You can see that 2014 was the last grant, nothing since then except the Jewel Lake lighting grant that I mentioned. So as an aside, building official Bob Dole has a long history of working with the state legislature, and when he came on board, he proposed just informal meetings with Anchorage state legislators. And we've had several of those, and we always take the opportunity to mention this fact that that whether it's state money or municipal money, if it comes to Anchorage, it benefits the broader public good. I wanted to talk a little bit about once a project is on the list and is on the bond package and the bond package passes, kind of what happens. Project design would start in, I guess, year one, and that preliminary design typically, unless it's an emergency situation, we would bond for about $500,000 for a design start, and that would fund a design study report, gathering survey information, gathering geotechnical subsurface soil information, and get us through about 35% design. And the outcome of that is the design study report document that really is a decisional document. At that point, we're deciding on an alternative to move forward. With that decision made and that document in hand, we also have much better pricing information. So then we would bond for complete design money and right-of-way acquisition. That's could happen the next year or a couple years later, just depending on the mix of projects on the CIP list. And then after we have an approved a final design, then we bond for construction. Mid-range construction project we might do in a single year. Larger projects like Pleasant Valley or Campbell Woods can take 2, 3, or 4 or more years to fully complete. And in my last bullet there, occasionally the design study report can recommend a no option alternative. That's probably not going to be the case if you're addressing significant drainage problems or a street that's so deteriorated you can't drive down it, like Campbell Woods streets or Pleasant Valley was. But it could be the case on some projects where the need has changed. Road improvement districts, that's another funding opportunity that used to be available. It still is available in code. It's not used, and I just wanted to touch on really why. So an RID is an opportunity for neighborhoods, communities, grassroots development of a project. And generally, it's a street project. It's not normally a drainage project, although there's drainage components. But their street may not be the standard, and residents may want improvements. So there's a couple scenarios there. If the street was previously built to standard and it's just deteriorated, then if an RID was approved by the residents and by the assembly and passed, the funding split would be 90% MOA, 10% residents. If the street was, if the street was not built to standard and the residents would like it built to standard or upgraded, then the funding split is 70% residents, 30% city, so bond funds.
I have a question real quick, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. Oh, I have to wait till the end of this slide. It's about the slide though.
Okay. So the property owners would propose an RID. We, Gary, would help them through that process. The property owners vote. The assembly would have to approve it. The municipal funds would have to come through the bond package. As I said, there haven't been any for about 10 years, and the reason is that if you use a cost of, say, $2,000 a linear foot to construct a new road, and that's not unreasonable, the cost for the 90-10 split is $7,000 a lot for a standard 70-foot frontage lot. And it's approaching $50,000 if the road is not built to standard and they want to bring it to standard. So very difficult for the average homeowner to come up with that much money, and to get 51%, 50% plus one of the residents along that street to vote for that. So it's a tool in the toolbox. It just hasn't been used in a number of years.
Thanks. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, so I'm wondering, I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to confirm. Campbell Airship Road, stuck in ice. You know, we've been doing a bunch of stuff to try to find money for them. They had a state grant, it ran out. We moved some money, we did some resurfacing, but you know, we know that the municipalities basically said that's it in terms of money we're going to give you for the foreseeable future. Could this be a tool they could use? Because it's technically in the LRSA, but it's I mean, you know probably all the issues with it. It runs through the park, it's a major street road, but it's technically in their LRSA, but they can't seem to, they can't raise enough money to repair the road, basically, through the LRSA.
Through the chair, if it's in a LRSA, I don't know if the RID program envisions that, because the municipality's share is bond funds, and the avenue for that right now is ARTSA bond funds, so we wouldn't be able to contribute to the share.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Middleton?
Good question. Maybe Chris Schutte could answer this if you just an example. So Holtquist bought a big property off of Lake Otis. It's Lake Otis, and they had to extend Mona. Did we do a split, or is that 100% on them?
Through the chair, that's I'm very familiar with that project. It's 100% on the developer, with one caveat. At the west end of Mona, there's an existing section of municipal street with houses on it that was never really built to standard. Street maintenance has done some work on it over the years, bringing in gravel to bring it up to a better standard. So I'm going off memory. I believe that street maintenance is going to work with the developer to upgrade that section, which fronts 3 or 4 lots. The remaining 2,000 or so feet of street will all be on the developer's
Okay.
cost.
That's good. Feel better about that. So we're doing that one stretch that's already been used.
Yes.
Okay, good, thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, just I just thought about it. Not connected to RID necessarily, but thinking again about Second Heights, and I think it's a pretty unique situation with how long Campbell Airship Road is, and you know they do a good job maintaining their own neighborhood, but they feel like they can't maintain this big city road. I'm sure there are some examples in South Anchorage like that too, but is there any way for them to like retro seed that portion of their LoRSA back to ARSA? And if they wanted to, would we take it? Could we take it?
There's a process laid out for code for doing an annexation of a service area into another service area. And essentially, it's like the parts service area experience we went through in 2017, where the majority of voters both in the area to be annexed and the area annexing have to approve the combination.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if, I know no one does this, and I know it's really expensive, but if a neighborhood were to opt to do it, would the 90% or the 70% that the MOA pays, is that just a commitment to put that on the bond, or where does that money come from? And if it's not that, and there's some fund that you use, would that move people ahead of the CIP process?
Yes.
Back when we were doing road improvement districts, once the assembly approved a district, then we would program funding into the CIP, initially for design, and then once we had a better idea of exactly what the amount would be, then for the rest of the project for construction in the future years. So that was funded through bonds, but then the property owners do not pay anything until the project is complete. All the bills have been paid, and so that process can take a year, and then I meet with them again and say, these are the costs, and this is what your share is going to be of those costs, what the 10% is for each property owner. So that cost then, those monies, they pay through their option, either lump sum or anywhere from 1 year to 30 years. There's a sliding scale depending on the amount that the Assembly approved a couple years ago.
Okay, I don't think that answered my question really, but it was helpful because that's more information. So you would get the road, say the neighbors say, we want to do this road, and then you would put it on the bond, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And then would that move it up in the 6-year, the priority ranking, basically? Because now it's on the bond, and so it's moving forward above other roads?
Well, we definitely give priority to projects that are underway.
But if you're now bonding for it, it's underway. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right. Once design started, that puts a project in a class that's going to receive a higher priority and then one that hasn't started
So
at all.
yes is the answer. Is the answer yes?
If I may, I think what you're asking, Assemblyman Quinn-Davidson, is if a neighborhood, and this may be a question for you, Gary, that I'm not conveying well. If a neighborhood determines and votes for an RID, and the Assembly votes to approve it, then how and where does that project get inserted into the 6-year CIP program?
Yeah,
does that
exactly.
project rise to a higher level than a project that has been on the list for a couple of years and maybe is slated to be funded next year? Would an RID project be slotted ahead of that, or?
Not necessarily, no.
They're evaluated on the same criteria?
There was a period 10 to 15 years ago that my approach to it was to say, try to fund one RID project per year. So even though we had several operating at the time, so it took a number of years to get them all completed. Does that provide any clarity? So they don't
kind of, yeah.
They don't really push out anything else, but just an additional factor we have to consider.
And I think one other factor is that many of these happened when there was state grant funding available, so there was a larger pool of funding. So I don't know if we can answer your question right now as to whether an RID project would go on the list outside of its normal ranking, but we'll talk about that more and get some information.
It's okay. I'm just curious for people who are like, we really want this road fixed. We really want this road fixed. And my first response is always talk to the state because they're the ones that have pulled back and not allowing us to update the roads. especially when I have state legislators asking me for certain road updates, that I really like to say that because it's, that's true. But the second thing might be, hey, if you really, really want this update, this will allow you to get it and it will move it forward. Like you're not kind of in this pool of possibilities for years and years. It's actually, so that's why I was wondering, but no one's doing it anyway, so I guess it's.
But in recent years, to follow up with that, I do receive phone calls several a year of people interested in upgrading the road or reconstructing it. And so we have that discussion. Once they hear how much it's going to cost
Yeah.
per property owner, that just kind of kills them out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because it used to be a very effective tool.
Why did it used to be effective? Because they still had to pay that percentage.
Yes, our experience has shown that if it was $3,000 to $6,000, generally you'd have a majority of property owners that would vote for forming the road improvement district. But once the number went over that, when our construction costs increased so much, then they just fell out of favor. And people are no longer willing to pay that
So
in
why
addition to the
have
property
construction
tax.
costs increased so much?
Through the chair, I think just over time with inflation, the cost of doing business, the cost of materials, we've seen our costs generally go up. We have seen in the past couple of years that our projects have been coming in very reasonable. I think we've seen, I wouldn't say we've seen a decrease in cost, but we've seen a decrease in the escalation of costs. And we can certainly, we'd be glad to have our engineering staff sit down and take a hard look at projects like Pleasant Valley, and Campbell Woods, which would be very representative of kind of current costs. I do know that the total bonded cost, current and projected for Campbell Woods, is on the order of $18,000 a lot. But that does include design and other costs.
Okay, thanks everyone for entertaining that.
Thanks. Mr. Weddleton?
I just want to get back briefly on Forest, looking for Stuckagan Heights Road to get covered. The city annexed into Arts Golden View without anyone on the road being in. So that passed clearly because a lot of people got something for free, and we love that.
Yeah. That's what Stuckagan's looking for too.
Yeah.
I mean,
It has to pass the vote.
what's that?
It didn't need the dual majority because there were no people included.
Oh, that's interesting. Right, it wouldn't even
None of the
include
neighbors.
Stuckagan because it would just be.
Just the
yeah,
road.
I think our fire station and our school are the only thing. Benny Benson are the only thing actually on the road. But I mean, whether or not we think it's just to take that road or not is an open question. Didn't realize that Golden View got that sweet deal. Maybe we should.
Thank you.
I'm almost done with my part, so thank you very much for your patience. The last thing I think I wanted to touch on was collector roads, collector and higher level roads versus local roads, and the funding strategy, the current strategy and the strategy in the past. Historically, local roads, neighborhood roads have not been done with bond money. They were generally done with state grants. So talk about the decline of state grants and the pressing need for projects like Campbell Woods and Pleasant Valley and others. So we have branched out into doing road reconstruction of local streets with bond money. So one of the obvious outcomes of that is that there's projects like that all across Anchorage. They're costly, and it takes away from the ability to do upgrade projects for the collector streets and to build new streets like 100th Avenue. So that was just I don't have a solution to that. I just wanted to, that ties back again to the decline in state grant funding. So I had a picture here somewhere, but I'm not finding it right now. But this last picture is the new culvert under Providence. This is a project that was done on an emergency basis last year, working very closely with the hospital and the university and Fish and Game and other agencies. So it came out very well in a very short time frame. So we're looking forward to success like that in Northern Lights Boulevard as well. So you had quite a number of questions during the meeting. I'm not sure we were able to answer all of them to your satisfaction. If you have more now, I'm glad to take them, or if you want to contact me by email.
Yeah, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. Just because you got a picture of a culvert on there, and I think I know the answer to the Muldoon question, but you know, in Muldoon, we missed a golden opportunity when we placed a culvert. It's more than a culvert, but when we moved that creek to not put some pedestrian facility in there. And I've heard conflicting reports about how much it would cost to have done that. But I'm wondering, when we make these kind of, when we rebuild these kind of things, do we think about including pedestrian facilities when we do it, or is it not appropriate?
Through the chair, I think in general, yes, we do look for those opportunities. For the Northern Lights culvert, which we're going to do this summer, for the Providence culvert, it's really just taking a stream and constraining it through a culvert, passing it to the other side of the road. So not an opportunity really here for a variety of reasons. There are surface crossings just very near there. You know,
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, on the Muldoon Debar, just south of Muldoon Debar, there's technically a surface crossing there too. And there is a surface crossing there, but it's not a good intersection. And it would be vast. We have a trail on both sides, and it just has to hit and go up to the intersection. And when I talked to folks when I first got in the assembly, I had the impression, maybe it was mistaken, that it wasn't even seriously considered. Like, I mean, and that was before the current administration, I think, was even in office when they were working through the state grant process. I think there was some federal funds involved too. But, you know, how seriously do we look at pedestrian facilities when that kind of thing? Because Muldoon, at least, they absolutely need some kind of pedestrian facility there for the trail, and we just don't have it. And we never will, because we'll never rebuild it.
So I don't know if I have a firm answer for you. We do consider pedestrian access with almost every project, unless it's strictly a drainage project, like these really are.
But how do you, I mean, that was a creek. How do you know something strictly drainage versus drainage plus something?
Well, for the Providence culvert, we were constrained by a gas line that was under the road. We were constrained by you can see the amount of headroom it has there.
Yeah.
That creek is constructed out of gravel. We had to haul the gravel in there, the riprap in there to build it. There wasn't physically room to put a pedestrian passage under there. So that would likely be the case on the Northern Lights project as well. I guess what I would say is let me reach out to Stephanie Mormillo and Brooke Blessing, who works for me. She's a non-motorized transportation coordinator, and see if I can get you a better answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you. I have two questions, and one is kind of a historical, so I don't know if anybody might really have the information on this one. But when I look at the history on the voter-approved bonds, there's really a couple of years there that were really low. So, especially 2015, 2013, anyway. So, did that just happen to be a year where bonds just didn't get approved, or we just didn't put that many out there? Does anybody happen to remember if there was a time when everything just got voted down?
Through the chair, I wasn't even with the municipality then. I'm going to defer to Gary.
That is what the administration times decided to put before voters.
Okay, so it was just a smaller bond package.
He has some
Okay.
background he wants to share.
Oh,
Sure.
When I was in the legislature, we had surpluses every year, 2009 through 2013 or 14 or whatever. And so we have these $2.5 billion, $3 billion capital budgets every year. And there's not enough construction companies in Alaska to build that many projects in a year. And so it took a couple of years after we had lost the surplus to finish those projects. And so since the state was funding a lot of those projects, then Muni didn't have to bond for them. That's why some of those years are lower there.
okay, that makes sense, thank you. So and then my second question though was about the O&M costs that are included in the bonds. So I guess technically that number, whatever it is meant to provide continued maintenance on that particular project, whatever that project was. So how do we actually track that then to know that that money actually goes toward that maintenance? And if it is for maintenance, how is it at the end of 20 or 25 years we don't have accumulated enough money to actually do the rebuild or the upgrade or whatever on that particular area?
Through the chair, I think
How's that work?
part of my answer is going to be I don't know, and I will get with Alan Jakowski and Paul Van Lanningham and Chris can also help. The O&M money, the other part of my answer is the O&M money, the 10,000 or 20,000 that's on a bond package to support O&M for the capital project is intended for O&M. It's not a capital replacement fund. So with that, I'll stop. And
That's exactly right. The O&M increments that are included are designed to increase the ability of street maintenance in particular to provide the additional services needed to maintain, and in some cases during that 3 to 5 year period, do any repairs, upgrades, et cetera, that are required. The underlying thinking being that all things being equal, typically the tax base continues to appreciate year after year, so that after a certain set period, any additional responsibilities that have come to the street maintenance department for street maintenance work, for example, by building new roads like 100th Avenue, et cetera, there will now be the tax base to help support that increased O&M obligation that we have incurred. So to reiterate Kent's point, they're not set up as capital reserves. They're set up in order to help offset the increased cost that the municipality now bears for providing its legally required maintenance services to those constructed portions and segments.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Thank you, Felix. Same slide. The story from 2000 on up to 2019 in the roads and transit, those numbers don't really match the story of the legislature providing less, because they're not, it's kind of the same except for that gap we already discussed. So why is that the case? Are we just doing less overall work? So, do you see what I'm saying? You would think, based on the story of what the state used to provide, that it would be like 5, 5, 10, 8, 5, 5. Now it's like 40 because we're picking up bulk of the work, but it's really not that different. So why?
through the chair, I think the answer is that that those numbers, as we talked earlier, the need far outweighs the available resources, even if we include state grant funding. So I think those numbers are what the administration determined was an appropriate bond amount for the past 25 years.
So we're just doing less overall work because of the loss of the state money.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a question on street lights. I know you mentioned Jewel Lake, and that was a big kerfuffle, as I understand it. And I'm just wondering, what do you see on the horizon as far as more of those types of scenarios as the state cuts out street lights in its right of way? Because clearly, I mean, that's a huge expense for the taxpayers to pick up.
Yeah, sure. So one of the challenges that this Jewel Lake experience brought to light is that we actually don't have accepted standards when it comes to our minimum lighting requirements and defined roadways, et cetera. And so our thought is that there has to be, number one, we all have to be playing by the same rules, which says if you're going to construct a road of a particular classification, the expectation is that it will provide this amount of lighting, et cetera, so that we don't get in a position where operational budgets are dictating, say, public safety. So that's part one of that. Part two, I think, is just people need to start accommodating the additional O&M as they plan out these budgets, and just know that they can't walk away from, you won't be able to walk away from your obligation to provide lights. And number three, which is pure editorial on my part, I do think that at some point there should be consideration of a streetlight utility type entity, much like we're envisioning the stormwater needs of the community, because lighting, especially in a northern climate like ours, is a particularly needed utility that doesn't entirely fall to any one entity personally, that is shared by many and really owned by none.
Okay. And if I may just follow up briefly, when you say, Chris, that we can't walk away from the O&M, you're talking about our partners at the state?
Yes.
Thanks.
We never walk away from O&M.
Oh, I knew that.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
I'll skip it. I want to make sure we have time for Craig.
Sure.
We're till 3?
3, yeah. Mr. Dunbar?
You take the answer.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. Go to the last slide. Back from that one. Chair. So this is the issue that I raised. The only reason I'm at this meeting is because I saw this was on the agenda. I had another meeting, but I had to stay for this.
Hey, this is great.
I had it. So we now recognize we're in a new paradigm. And what I would like from you is to provide for us, you collectively, the administration, whomever, kind of a guidance on how we address this changing paradigm. Because the Scooter Vanguard project was just one of many projects that are coming forward that are going to be a train wreck of policy decision making, because the way the funding was structured, the muni would be on the hook for 2.5 times what the state would be paying, which would be a full quarter of the total project, and that's flipped upside down on its head. And so I anticipate that there are a number of projects that started into the flow between 2001 and 2015 that are going to face the same kind of train wreck if we don't set a policy and begin to look at those projects directly. And so, in particular, they are the projects that have the nexus between the state and the city, probably not our projects, not their projects, but the ones that are both of our projects. And so I don't need an extemporaneous off the top of your head answer, but it would be great to have guidance. People have said, oh, that's the purview of AMATS to sort those questions out. But in some ways, AMATS only looks at the questions on the tip, and we're going forward, how these projects work. Everyone can make comments, but there's no conversation happening about how we kind of come together between the bodies. So that slide is really a problem that we're going to see for 5 to 7 years unless we have a very assertive, forward-thinking conversation that works.
Through the chair, I think that's a very valid point and a good strategic observation. I made a note of it. I don't have an answer right now, which you didn't expect, but it needs some effort, I believe.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Definitely this next topic will take much longer than 30 minutes, but we'll get through as much as we can today.
The 3 p.m. work session, that's for something that's being voted on Tuesday. Right?
Yeah.
Life safety bond.
Yeah. I knew it had been introduced, but I didn't understand. I might see it because I'm not going to be for the whole meeting.
By Crystal to ask some questions. I'm sorry. Life safety got pulled by you to.
Yeah, Okay, we're gonna deal that with that at 3.
All right, go
Ready
ahead.
to go? All right.
I'm going to say it. Guys.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Craig Lyon. I'm the AMATS coordinator. I do like the other letters of the alphabet, but I'm going to use that one. That's a good way to describe it. It's the federal program, and thus we have tons of acronyms that never make any sense to people. So I understand that. This is an AMATS 101 is what I call it, because it can be terribly confusing to folks. If I'm going too fast, let me know, and I'll slow down a little bit. If I'm going too slow and you're losing attention, don't worry, that's normal. It's the federal program. So, but let me start by making sure this is clear. We're not actually the same person. I'm the older gentleman on the left. This was for Dress Like Your Boss Day. So.
Chris, you're missing it.
Chris, yeah, you didn't even see it.
No, you did include it.
I told you. I had to get some points for that.
Twins, not actually twins.
So, what we'll go over is what is an MPO, what does an MPO do, what federal funds are received, and what are AMATS' needs, the obligatory moose picture because we're Alaska, all that sort of wonderful stuff. So, what is a Metropolitan Planning Organization? An MPO, again, acronyms, you get that. But an MPO is a Metropolitan Planning Organization set up by the feds in the 60s with the advent of the Federal Highway Trust Fund, and they basically said anywhere there's 50,000 population in the United States, they want a cooperative entity made up of the state and local governing bodies. So in Chicago there's an MPO, in Newark there's an MPO, in Fairbanks there's an MPO, and it's designed to be the state and whatever your local government is. In Fairbanks, you have City of North Pole, City of Fairbanks, and North Star Borough. Here in Anchorage, we are extremely unique. We only have one local governing body. So It's the smallest MPO policy committee that I know. But basically, it's the forum for cooperative transportation decision-making for the metropolitan planning area. And
Sorry, could you remind me, there's a population metric?
50,000, if you have 50,000 in a certain density, you're an MPO. If you have 200,000, you're what's called a transportation management area. So we are what's called a TMA, and there are different requirements that go with that. But basically 50,000, you're an MPO. So what do MPOs do? We carry out the metropolitan transportation planning process. As you can imagine, with the funding that comes from the feds, there are all sorts of requirements. We are required to do the first four plans that I have listed there. We're required by federal law to do those. We have a lot of other plans that we do, like the Sprenard Road Corridor study, the non-motorized plans, the Eagle River CBD study we've done in the past. But we're required to do those first four. And they are the Unified Planning Work Program, which is just the planning funds. What is my staff going to do for the next couple of years? The Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is the 20-year plan, the Transportation Improvement Program, which is the 4-year plan, and then we're required to have some public participation plan, some form of that, which talks about what are the ways we're going to communicate with the public.
Yes, Ms. Kennedy?
Craig, can you go ahead and tell me again what the length of time those plans are all? You
I
said
will
the
go over
20
these in more
You're gonna
detail
go-
in just a
okay,
bit,
then
but
I'll
the UPWP is the 2 years.
2 years, okay.
The MTP, or Metropolitan Transportation Plan, is 20 years, and the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, is 4 years.
Got it, okay, thank you.
And the last bullet at the bottom, the air quality and conformity analysis and determination, all that sort of stuff, that's the hammer that the feds have, which basically says, here's your allotment of funds, you have to make sure, and again, this is in layman's terms, you have to make sure you're not polluting too much. A lot more specifics, as you can imagine, but that's the easy way to look at it. Make sure you're not polluting too much. This is the list of federal planning factors that we have to look at when we're deciding what kind of improvements we're doing. There are, what is that, 9, 10, 11 of them now. When I started, there were 7, so they just keep adding. I'm pretty sure it doesn't have anything to do with me, but they keep adding more planning factors that we have to do. The one at the bottom, enhanced travel and tourism, is new, so we're incorporating that into our criteria, et cetera.
Can I ask, so these are the factors that AMAS has to use to determine the plans in the MPO? Or what is this?
These are the factors that we have to look at when we decide what kind of projects we're going to do.
But how does that relate? The prior slide, I don't get how it relates to the prior slide. So this is about MPOs and what kind of plans they develop, or you develop within an MPO.
Yeah, so AMATS is an MPO.
Oh, okay.
Like I said, acronyms, they're
Yeah.
When I first started, I had to tell the staff to stop using acronyms for a week so I could understand them.
Yeah.
AMATS is an MPO. We're this organization that is required to do this work.
Okay.
We have these plans that we're required to do, and we have to look at these planning factors when we
To do
decide
all of those plans.
when we're doing those
Okay,
projects.
that's what I thought.
In other words, if we have someone says, here's a project, it's going to, I can't even think of something, but improve education in the schools, it doesn't hit one of those. So we're not really allowed to do it. If it hit one of those and it also enhanced travel and tourism, but it provided some educational opportunities in the schools, then you can do it because it hits one of the planning factors.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, just very quickly on that slide. It seems like your 7th point is directly antithetical to a lot of the other points, and emphasize the preservation of the existing system. I mean, we know that a number of our roads were built in a really unsafe fashion that emphasize cars over everything else. So we're trying to improve safety, security, mobility of people versus freight, travel and tourism, like walkability, bicycles, all that stuff. Isn't that emphasize preservation of the existing system? Doesn't that kind of trump everything else?
Well, so through the chair, you're not typically going to have a project that hits every single one of these. So what they're telling you here is, we want you to look at projects that might increase, the ability for pedestrians to use a facility or to get to work or whatever. You may have a different project that all it's designed to do is just improve the conditions of that road, the subsurface or whatever. So they're not going to hit everything, but different projects will do different things. And as I said, if you have one project and it doesn't hit any of those, well, it doesn't make sense to add in the program. If you have a project that emphasizes 3 or 4 of those planning factors, that's better than one that just hits one of them. These are the ones they want you to look at it and consider. You're not necessarily going to get a project that gets all of those.
So these are justifications, not criteria.
These are what you're supposed to look at. These are what they call them the planning factors. I guess you'd call it justifications. When we build our criteria, we try to make sure, or we have to make sure, we're adding a criteria that hits all of those, and some may hit more than one. But
okay,
that's a.
You said
you
you
didn't
do all
answer
of
my
them. That
question.
includes
Thanks.
preservation of the system. So how is that? You know what? It's fine. Let's move forward.
Through the chair, real quick, one way that this also speaks to, I think, actually answers your question is that it's not literally about preserving things the way they are. I think some people will interpret that to mean preservation of the existing network, so that this is an emphasis on not constantly building new expansion to the network.
Right.
But if you have a network that's in place already, you should focus on retaining and improving that.
That's a good way to put it. They want to make sure you're not just, well, we need a new connection here, so we're adding this road. Oh, we need to add some more lanes over here. They want to make sure, are you paying attention to the stuff you already built? And are you making sure that's not crumbling so you're driving on gravel?
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So are these all just generalized topics, the way they are, or does each one have some breakdown of specifics to quantify or qualify any of those topics?
This is it's sort of my truncated version of it. I mean, it'll say
Okay.
increase the safety of the transportation system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just truncated it here just to get it up on the slide. They have more information about what each planning factor means.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So general guidelines for when you're looking at what you're doing, sort of thing. I mentioned the size of our policy committee and the fact that we're only one local government entity as opposed to Fairbanks. So we have DOT on there, the Central Region Director, the Mayor of Anchorage, 2 assembly members, and the Department of Environmental Conservation, Air Quality. That's what I said at the one slide, that's the hammer that they have. You gotta meet that. Yes?
Who determines who can be on it? I mean, is this straight from the federal requirements, or?
So the federal requirements are, you have a policy committee, you have a policy board. It has to have some state people and some local government people. Figure it out how you want to. You have to have some kind of cooperative agreement between the 2 entities. So our agreement that we have is from 2001. It hasn't been changed since then in a large way. We've amended a bit. The Mayor of Anchorage is the Mayor of Anchorage. It's listed there. The Assembly, you folks decide who are your representatives on the body. The operating agreement says the State Commissioner of DOT or their designee and the State Commissioner of Environmental Conservation or their designee. So basically the governor decides those 2 state positions.
But you could add more if you wanted.
So right now our operating agreement lists these 5 people. If the AMAT's policy committee said, hey, we want to add these people, they can do that.
Okay.
The state can't add anyone unilaterally, the assembly can't add anyone unilaterally, the mayor can't add anyone. It has to be agreed to by the 5-member policy committee.
Got it, thanks.
Okay. We have a technical advisory committee, and it's an 11-member committee, some engineers, planners, some from the city, some from the state. Port of Alaska's on there, the railroad's on there, but it's 11 members. This is advisory to the policy committee. We have a bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee. We have a freight advisory committee. We have a citizens advisory committee. They're all advisory to the policy committee. So that's that. So my office, basically I have myself and 4 transportation planners. We are federally funded. We are municipal employees, but we answer to the policy committee. There are MPOs around the country that are housed in a state department. There are MPOs around the country, for example, like Fairbanks, that are a completely independent nonprofit. They used to be inside the city, I think of Fairbanks, not North Pole, but they are now a completely independent nonprofit off by themselves. There are some MPOs that are inside a university. We are inside the municipality. We are funded by federal funds. We have to have a local match, and our local match is, we capture it as an in-kind contribution from the municipal traffic department. They go out and do their traffic counts, put the hoses on the ground and count how many cars are driving by and pedestrian counts and all that sort of stuff, and we just capture that. They're doing that with non-federal funds, and we capture that. because we use those traffic counts to feed our transportation model, computer model. So that's about it for what we do. I mean, we do a few more things, but that's the general idea. Here, kind of an important part, we have our boundaries. We basically are the same boundaries as the municipal boundaries, except we stop at Potter Marsh. The municipality goes down to Goodwood, but there isn't enough density down there, so the federal government, when they laid out, here's what your boundaries are, and they're based on census tracts, they stop us at Potter Marsh. So we can't fund projects from Potter Marsh south. We cannot do planning efforts down in Goodwood or turning it on community. So yeah, we basically follow those boundaries. So some of the other colors in there talk about we are a limited maintenance area for carbon monoxide. We used to be a non-attainment area because we polluted too much. Our air quality improved due to the IM program and better cars and all the different efforts that we did. So now we have a smaller portion where we have to maintain monitoring of the air quality, and then the PM10 issues that we have in Chugach Eagle River. We used to have them throughout the bowl. They used to be worse in Chugach Eagle River. AMATs, before I got here, spent a lot of funds on paving roads out there, so the air quality improved out there. So we're working our way towards attainment areas in both, which will decrease the amount of monitoring and stuff that we are required to do. The state is still required to do, but AMATs won't have to fund that as much. So the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, that's one of those things I talked about earlier. That's the 20-year plan. It basically says, what are all the surface transportation improvements you're going to do inside the AMATS area for the next 20 years, regardless of source of funds? So we show bond funds, city bond funds, funded projects in there. We show state funded projects. We show the state's allocation of their national highway system, their federal funds, and of course we show the AMATS allocation. Has to be updated every 4 years. That's underway right now. I believe it's being introduced on your next assembly meeting on the 28th, I believe it is, and the public hearings on your first meeting in February. We do have a public meeting February 9th, I believe it is. Let me see, February 5th, 5 to 7 at the Mountain View Public Library. So if you could just grab it. I'll get there.
Yes, Ms. Alto?
Thank you. I've been talking a lot to folks about the fact that the MTP is up for update, and then they open it up, and they get overwhelmed, and they stop. So any advice or things I could do to talk with my constituents about this? Because they really want to participate. They have a lot of strong feelings about roads and transportation. And I would love for them to utilize this opportunity.
Yeah. I absolutely understand that. I would strongly suggest they come to the public hearing. It will hopefully explain things in a little easier way than just either a quick slide or opening up however many pages that gigantic document is. It is. I understand it's challenging. It's supposed to be what are the overarching principles, but then also what are the actual projects that we're going to do. So it's a combination of guiding principles for the document with hitting those planning factors and the goals, but also specific projects.
Is there some way to, and I haven't had a lot of time to spend on the website, but if you love or hate Tudor Road and you want to give lots of comments about Tudor Road, is there some good way to just navigate to the right spot to be putting in your input about Tudor Road? If there is, or if there's some way to do that, that would be good information. I would like, it doesn't have to be right this minute, so that I can at least kick that back out to those folks who want to make a specific comment.
Through the chair, glad you brought up the website. So the first place that we would direct most constituents is to the website. There are whole portions of that website that try to break it down into what I think is a little more digestible English. It's also the comment portal. So that's, if you're going to send people anywhere, send them there, because it's a one-stop shop both for the actual current public review draft as well as all the background materials that may help or may overwhelm further, as well as the comment submission.
So they can just go and put in their comment. It doesn't have to be in any specific spot, because that's been the thing, like, it's so large, they don't necessarily want to go through all of it, but they know what they want to comment on.
I would say if they know what they want to comment on, just send us the comment. They don't need to tell us, you know, page 13 where it talks about such and such, just,
Okay.
you know, Tudor Road, you have an issue with that, or what you think needs to be done there, just send it that way.
Brace yourself.
Yeah, no, that's,
Thank you.
yeah, so, I'm gonna start this kind of topic, and this guy, Mike Finn, will clarify it, because I'm gonna probably not say exactly what he wants me to say. But, so, this is the MTP, it is for AMATs. It goes through your body. And the Assembly is looking at it to provide comments to us. And it is also something that you will adopt by ordinance, I believe, and so it's going to be the Anchorage. No, what is it adopted? See, I knew it. There you go.
Sorry.
That's what we did last time.
It's really confusing. So the item that is on the agenda related to this is a resolution.
That's a resolution.
And the reason that is there is because there's actually a code provision about how the Assembly as a body submits comments to the MTP, although it's called something else in the code language.
I think it's called the long range.
It's called the long range transportation plan. But in essence, it's weird in a way because it says that the Assembly, if it has any comments about the MTP 2040, which is in the actual title of the resolution, I know it was really weird, but if there are any comments from the Assembly, you are required to hold one public meeting on those comments or on that resolution where you insert your comments prior to transmitting that to the AMATS Policy Committee for consideration as part of their purview to adopt the MTP 2040. It's a very convoluted and confusing section, but it's a useful section that was inserted by previous assemblies because the Assembly felt excluded from the input process. So we apologize in advance. It's a kind of a weird fill-in-the-blank resolution for you to consider in the future. Once you do that, those comments are transmitted to the Policy Committee. The Policy Committee is ultimately the deciding and adopting body for the MTP 2040. The municipality of Anchorage, however, also has a long-range transportation plan. And what we have done in the past is we have adopted the MTP as the long-range transportation plan for the municipality through the regular process that we go through for adopting elements of the comprehensive plan, meaning public review, comment, planning and zoning, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a world that exists where there can be a policy committee approved MTP 2040 that says Tudor Road needs to be 2 lanes, but there could be a locally adopted long-range transportation plan that says Tudor Road is fine, in fact, add more lanes. It's an interesting and confusing process, but the city does try to have its own long-range transportation plan to support its comprehensive goals. We have just used the MTP, and municipal departments and agencies are heavily involved in this. We've used the MTP as sort of the blueprint to provide that long-range transportation plan. That will come to you because that is an element of the comprehensive plan, and you do have to be the final approving body on that. It is possible that it may be different than the MTP 2040, but I would guess as of today, 99.9% of it will be identical. So.
Mr. Wellington?
Okay.
You good? Ms. Alto?
Thanks. So after the MTP goes through this and goes through AMATS, then the long-range transportation plan will occur. And I hope that if there are any differences, someone will crosswalk them for us.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
That's why it's confusing, because the last time we did it, it was we got the MTP done, and then you folks adopted it by ordinance, and we're doing it a little different this way. So.
You missed a bunch of confusing stuff.
Good. I'll probably ask about it later.
So did I. Okay, so there's the MTP, that's the 20-year one, all sources of funding, including municipal bonds and state funds and the federal funds that the state controls. The TIP is the 4-year plan. This is the Transportation Improvement Program. This is just the capital funds, or the federal funds that AMATS controls. There are other funds in the TIP, but the only ones that AMATS controls are that small. It's about $30 million of federal funds. It's, again, approved cooperatively. The tip does come before the assembly. There's only one tip, so we're going to have 2 different ones. It has to be fiscally constrained. It has to be, whereas the MTP is, what are all the sources of funds? And, we can say, we could say we're going to, in 10 years in the MTP, we're going to get $15 million worth of state grants, and we're going to get, $40 million worth of earmarks from the federal government. And people will go, well, I don't know if you haven't had those for a while. As long as it's kind of close to reality, you can do that. With the tip, it's just the federal funds, and they tell us, here's your allocation. It's $24,925,000, and that's what you have to program to it. Absolutely has to be fiscally constrained to that, whereas the MTPA just has to pass the SMILE test. It has to make it seem reasonable.
Ms. Alto?
Thank you. So these are all federal funds. So these would be primarily state road projects that then the Transportation Improvement Program looks at?
So we can use our federal funds basically on any public right-of-way inside the AMATS area. So a lot of these funds go to state routes, O'Malley, Abbott, etc. Some of them do go to some of the municipal-owned facilities. It can go on either one. We could pay it an alley if we wanted to, but it just, what I always tell people about the federal funds is it's going to take a lot longer, and it's going to cost more because of the NEPA process. So it might make more sense if it's a smaller project to just find out if you can do bonds or get a state grant for it. But we can use it on any public right-of-way inside the AMATS area. What you have to keep in mind is that there's always a 90-10 split. So the feds will give you 90% of the funds, and whoever owns the facility has to give the other 10%. So, if we do O'Malley Road, state has to come up with the match for that. If we do Spinard Road, the municipality has to come up with a match for that. If it's outside of ARTSA, until recently it was, well, you're going to have to get a state grant for that. As you know, you just passed something recently that allowed for, if you're talking about some emergency access, things of that nature, you can put that on the bond. So that changes kind of the ballgame with how we've worked for a while. But there always is 10% of the funds have to be brought to the table by whoever owns it, and the state's requirement is that that money has to be shown up front.
Just one follow-up. Where does this live? This document live? Like, if I want to go see what's on the short-term funding program right now, where do I go?
Yeah, this is on our website,
Okay.
and I can certainly send the link to the assembly so they can see it, or you can ask the guy right next to you because he looks at it almost on a routine basis when he's trying to fall asleep. So,
Thank you.
and I'm happy to sit down with you or anyone else who wants to and help explain how that creature makes sense. So, any other questions on that one? I'll just zip by. Okay. So we have 3 main sources of funding for what AMATS controls. There's the Surface Transportation Block Grants. That's our main chunk of funds. We have some transportation alternative funds in there. It's a smaller amount, but those are for non-motorized projects only. And then what they call congestion mitigation and air quality. And we use those funds usually, we send a decent amount of money to transit. We have things related to air quality. So our air quality business and public education campaign, which supports Bike to Work Day and the plug-in block heater things and things of that nature. So those are our chunks of money that go into the tip right now. There are a couple different ways to get a hold of us. There's our website down at the bottom, and that's basically it. What else did I miss that you wanted to cover?
You're a rock star.
Got it all. Any other questions?
Are these, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, mine's kind of dumb, but are these bolded because these are acronyms?
Got it.
SDBG and TA and CMAQ?
Yeah,
Okay.
CMAQ, yeah.
I'm going to start throwing some of those out. Nonsensically.
Thanks. Mr. Dunbar?
Can you, or us, or anyone else, build a toll booth at a Klutna, and why or why not?
I'm told that, so that's a federally funded highway, and I'm told if it's federally funded, you can't charge tolls on it. But that's the state's answer. So I can do a little more research. That guy's doing this, so he must have done some research on it already.
Well, we have something in the MTP that says a study for toll bridge on.
It's a study for it. You can
Right,
do
but
a
it's
study.
Why we study for something we can't do?
Well, we don't know
Well,
yet.
because I don't know exactly. I think it has to do with maybe some state law, but I'm not 100% certain because some people have said, well, we can do the study to look at what we might be able to do along there.
Through the chair, actually, I think that if I recall that project, John, it was for tolling for high occupancy lanes. In other words, you pay a premium to use the high occupancy lane.
Yeah, as long as you had a lane that was
Yeah,
available
that's a
that
good
you
idea.
didn't have to pay, it's allowed, I guess.
Or the, fast lane, or whatever you want to call it.
Because you want to reward people who are carpooling. You don't want to make them pay.
It's just a study.
Yeah,
We
that's
make the
also
bus
true.
pay more.
I'll pay more to get in the fast lane.
It wasn't a project we submitted.
No, but
Yeah.
there are two different, there's a high occupancy lane and a fast lane.
Fast
There's two
lane,
different
yeah,
things,
there's-
because the high occupancy lane should be free.
Thanks, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. I'm still kind of trying to also understand the structure and specifically the administrative side of it. So if you were to, and I'm not suggesting this, but if you were to retire and they needed to find somebody to replace your position, who has the authority to do that?
So I'm a municipal employee. I'm a non-rep right now, so.
So to go through the
It would be through
mayoral
the
appointment
municipal
kind of
I would
process.
hire somebody.
And the planning
Okay,
department. That's
but the
where we're
mayor
located.
would basically. Okay.
When I started, it was an exec position, so I was in the 14, and it got changed over, so.
Okay, thank you. And then I had one other question, and that was, we're about to go into a different work session that has to do with something that you brought up, the life safety access roads. And so you mentioned something about how you think we were allowed to do that, or how we did pass the ordinance that allows that. So I'm just kind of hoping that you might stick around for a few minutes and maybe be a resource. Is that, can I ask that, Mr. Chair?
Sure, it's been asked.
Sure.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. That was a bit of a whirlwind.